Hi, I'm Jennifer Stein. Welcome to Line Mufon here at Radnor Studio 21. Today I have an amazing guest with me. His name is David Good. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about David's background. David is the son of a prominent anthropologist named Kenneth Good, who ventured into the Venezuelan rainforest. I believe it was in the 1970s?
1975.
1975, that's what I thought. He went there to study the indigenous community there and their food and their lifestyle and their relationships. David's father was supposed to reside there for about 6 months and as part of a research project, but instead he stayed on and off for about 12 years, making several trips back and forth. In the process, he married a Yanomami woman from this indigenous community, and they had 3 children. David is the oldest of these 3 children. So the story behind his parents' marriage and their romance actually got the attention of syndicated press in the 70s and turned into a National Geographic special in 1992, which documented one of the family's return trips to their village known as the Hasapuateri tribe or group. Their story can be read in his father's book called Into the Heart, which he wrote. His father's name was Kenneth Good. Now, David spent the first 5 years of his life going back and forth between our industrialized United States and this remote village nestled in the Amazon rainforest in southeastern Venezuela. As a Yanomami American, David wrestled with his indigenous identity, especially since his mother had to leave the family when he was about 5 years old. It would take over 20 years before David would be able to embark on a journey back to find his mother and reunite with her in her culture. His account can be read in the book which he recently published in 2011 called The Way Around. David is a graduate of East Stroudsburg University of Pennsylvania, where he received his bachelor's and his master's degree in biology. And in 2013, he founded a nonprofit organization called The Good Project, which we're going to be speaking a little bit about today, too. This nonprofit organization is dedicated to the education, health care, and cultural preservation of the Yanomami and the Kabarkar indigenous groups, both in South and Central America. This organization serves as a trustworthy bridge between these 2 traditional worlds of natives and the industrial world. The Good Project is careful never to engage in any exploitive manner and is keenly aware of the sensitive balance between supporting this social and economic needs of the people, along with encouraging their traditional values and customs to be preserved, but also supporting the needs as they grow and begin contact with the industrial world. So they work to educate the general public of the need to differentiate and protect these different ways of living and to observe their differences across these cultural divides. Their work, they work with other local and additional they work with other national and local NGOs as well, with special missions to try to create community collaborations and to set common goals and to share resources to achieve their common goals. So David has become a very experienced public speaker, and he's been traveling internationally to educate and raise awareness and provide support for these unique insights and needs of the Yanomami people. So we are just absolutely thrilled to have you come to Mainline MUFON to be presenting for us tonight for our local group. And for me, it's such an honor to get to know you, David. I have so much respect and admiration for the journey you have made, both personally, internally, emotionally, and the journey you've made to find your mother and to now try to bring the rest of the world into your story and into your mission.
Well, thank you very much. For me, it's an honor to be here to speak with you, Jennifer, and to be able to take this opportunity to share, my culture, the Yanomami, to the people out there.
Yes, it's in reading your book, I was really touched by the bravery you had to express and explain as you were growing up. I mean, I see this book, of course, probably the first of many books you will probably write throughout your life. And it almost begins recounting your adolescence, trying to come to terms with this. So just let's start at the beginning. From the introduction I've given our audience, they know a little bit about the background. Your father, explain to us why your father left living the tribe and came here.
Yeah. So a lot of people, especially in the media, have this image that my father had taken this, woman born and raised in the Amazon of Venezuela to the suburbs of New Jersey and Philadelphia. Well, things weren't quite as clear cut as that. So it happened in incremental stages. My father periodically had to leave the territory from the Amazon to renew permits and visas, and that caused a strain on the relationship. Because in Yanomami culture, a man never leaves his wife for extended periods of time. So one day he said, come to my world, where we can always be together, so that if I have to leave, we won't be separated for a long time. And of course, my mother was amenable to that. But things got complicated. Things are a little bit more complicated in this world than they are in the jungle, especially in terms of funding. So he was out in the cities in Venezuela and Caracas looking for funding and resources to help him get back to the jungle, but it simply just weren't there. So finally one day he said, okay, well, if I can't do it here, I'll try to do it in my hometown in Philadelphia. And that's when my mother embarked on a journey of her own and arrived here in Philadelphia. So that's what happened.
It was quite a culture shock for her,
Yeah.
from what I understand. And she would spend time here, and you three children were born. Mostly, were you all born in the United States?
I was born in Bryn Mawr Hospital. My brother was born in New Jersey. My sister had the honor of being born on a banana leaf in the Amazon jungle.
Wow. Wow. So your family made many trips back and forth. And this National Geographic documentary, tell us about how that came about and,
Sure.
and what that trip was, what kind of return it was for your family.
Well, my mom was pregnant with me when she moved here to Philadelphia, so I was supposed to be born down there, but only weeks after she was up here, I was born here in Bryn Mawr. And then my mom and my father decided, they created this Yanomami American family. I'm the oldest. I have a younger brother and a younger sister. And over the years, it became more and more expensive to fund an expedition to the depths of the Amazon when you have 3 little kids to take care of. And so as the years had gone by, my father had to get a job, a teaching position, and my mom, who didn't know how this world works, beyond her Amazonian border, she couldn't understand why my father had to leave for so long. She couldn't understand wages and taxes and having to pay your bills and why dad had to leave for so long. And as we got older, things got more expensive, more difficult, until it got to the point where it had been almost 3 years since we had returned to the jungle. And that's when he was approached by National Geographic, and they had offered to fund a return trip if they could, film this, incredible journey of these 2 families living in 2 worlds. And so that's how it came to fruition.
Well, it's an amazing archival footage and a documentary that you can go to now when you're using it possibly to present and speak and doing the work that you're doing. It's, I know it probably created some problems for you in your youth, which I'd like to touch on a little bit. It is known that your mom had just difficulties in really being able to be away from your father, but then also living here, coming back here to the America, to New Jersey, just really didn't work for her either. So she left. So talk a little bit about what you struggled with through your life without having a mom and with dealing with this diverse background. I mean, it wasn't something you were really proud of when you were little.
Yeah. So to kind of paint a picture and to put into perspective of where my mom was coming from, dealing with the, you said culture shock. The Yanomama during those 70s were an indigenous group deep in the Amazon that had limited to no contact with the outside world. And, a lot of that had to do with the fact that they were so deep in the Amazon. There were no major, water routes to their, traditional territories. They had this thick jungle brush that kept out conquistadors, scientists, journalists, and so on. And then you had the Guajaribo Rapids. They were very difficult to get past. So you can understand why my mom and her family had remained isolated for so long. So what that means is that, they have little to no understanding of what the outside world is. And before Mom came here, she thought that the whole world was the Amazon jungle. She thought that she was just going from one village to another. And to sort of get a perspective of what that was like, you got to think of the Yanomama as a culture, well, technologically speaking, did not really get past the Stone Age. They couldn't count beyond 2. They had no written language. They had, time was just linear. It was not compartmentalized or cyclical like we have it here. And everything they needed was extracted from the surrounding rainforest. They had no clothes. They just lived in this communal-like society, and that was life to them as they knew it. Then my dad came along and introduced a different kind of lifestyle to my mom. So when my mom came here, it was a huge culture shock, seeing cars for the first time, having to wear clothes all the time. A full-length mirror would freak her out, and she had to get used to the foods that we ate. And just imagine, the way I describe it, it's like going into a time machine and fast forwarding 2,000 years to a different realm, to a different universe. Yes. Where the people were different, the language is different. So over the years, she adapted, but what became hard for her was extreme isolation from her Amazonian family. She couldn't go out and just hunt or go crabbing or, go out and collect firewood like she could do down there. And then after spending several years of being apart from her family, I think the way I describe it is like a fish out of water. She was like suffocating, and she was going, she's becoming very angry and irate and depressed. And as a young kid, I couldn't understand it. Of course, I'm an adult now and I understand it. But when I was 5, she said, I can't do it. Not one more day can I live, here in the U.S. So she had to make the hard decision to separate from the family. She stayed down here, and I stayed up here, and that would be the last time I would see her for 20 years.
Wow. Wow, I'm sure it's it's devastating for any of us. It's almost like your parent died. Mm-hmm. She didn't, but for you as a young child, it was very difficult. And as you were growing up, this association with such a far and different extreme culture, was it something you wanted to identify with or not identify with? Describe a little bit about what that's like for you as a young adult.
Sure.
Because you cover this so well in your book.
Yeah, and in my book, I just sort of wanted to, I needed to tell the people what I had dealt with in my, tribulations growing up and an identity crisis, because it sort of paints a backdrop to, how important and monumental it was for me to find my mom, because the struggle didn't happen on the moment that I decided to find her. It began a long time ago before. When she left. So as a young child, when I was 5, when she left, I was a bit confused, but as the years had gone by and I realized she wasn't coming back, I had internalized it as abandonment. I thought that as a young child, being that I wasn't fully Yanomama, I thought that I wasn't good enough for her, and I started, developing sort of a hatred towards her, not just towards her, but towards my heritage, my culture, my indigenous background, because I thought as an adolescent, why should I be proud of being Yanomama? Why should I be proud of my heritage if my connection to that heritage, being my mom, abandoned me, left me? So completely renounced my culture. my Yanomama roots. I just wanted to be a typical American kid. I played baseball, you know, I was a paper boy, got good grades, and I just wanted to sort of paint myself as an all-around, American kid. But little did I know that by not addressing that abandonment issue as a kid would compound into something much more dark, much more, dangerous as I grew older, especially when you wake up in the mirror and you see yourself in the mirror and you say, as
You
much
know,
as you can hide from it,
yeah.
you can't hide from the fact that you're your mother's son.
Right, right. Yes, it's, I think all youth goes through a desire to want to completely fit in and be, part of their age range, their age group, and their community that they're part of. Everyone wants to do that. Anyone who has immigrated from one country to another experiences a very similar thing, but you were dealing with a compounded issue of emotional abandonment, and you really worked your way through that beautifully in the way you describe it in your book. You don't skip or skip the corners.
No.
You
Yeah,
talk about all the dark corners,
I do,
and
and
there
I
were
do.
many. It's why I said that you were quite brave in really revealing and sharing, not being afraid to share the pain that you had in your heart, because now your heart is so full. You've the darkest days that you faced in your adolescence have come through to become what I interpret as hugely rewarding and powerfully moving identity and purpose as an adult. As much as you wanted to abandon your connection then, stepping back into it now as an adult is like 180 degrees or maybe even 360 degrees. It's a whole different world for you.
I agree.
So that transition that happened, talk to us a little bit about that. There was one major teacher I remember reading in your book who was I believe, a biology teacher in college, whom just kind of mentored you. So share a little bit about that experience and what made you decide you needed to reconnect with your culture.
So throughout the years, I've dealt with sort of a roller coaster ride of depression and alcoholism, and it's started in my high school years, went well into college, and I realized that I had hit many what I had thought were rock bottoms, and I had sort of this epiphany that if I were going to continue on in my life, if I were going to keep following this path, it's going to end even uglier than the way it's ending now. And I didn't want it to be that way. And even though as a young adult, 21, 22, I knew what it stemmed from. Like I couldn't hide from it. I couldn't lie to myself. And I knew it stemmed from something that happened almost 20 years ago from Mom leaving me. And the fact that I never addressed it, and I never coped with it, and I never really, got past it. And that's when I realized I had to do something. I had to step out of my comfort zone and really, try to find out who I am and why Mom left. And that's when I picked up my dad's book and I read it from cover to cover for the first time. And I started learning more about Yanomama culture and their background. And then as I did, I started gaining sort of an understanding as to why Mom left this world. And when I started understanding, it almost, I almost came to sort of a forgiveness, even though I didn't actually think she needed my forgiveness, but I felt like I needed to forgive her for me. And then when I came to that realization, or that, that epiphany, that moment where I could be okay with myself, realizing that, okay, I am Yanomama, I'm the son of a Yanomama woman. I said, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But then I started learning more about the culture and my heritage. Like, this is more than just okay. This is amazing to learn about who the Yanomama are and where my mom's from and how brave she was to come up here. So I went from absolutely hating myself, hating my mom, complete 180, to loving my mom and forgiving her and wanting to learn everything I wanted to know about the Yanomama culture, my background, my father's story, my mother's story. But one thing that I didn't really quite do is open myself up to the public. I had a very close group of friends. We're talking like 2 or 3 people that knew my deepest, darkest secrets. But I just didn't have that courage to do that until one day, just out of the blue. His name was Dr. Alan Spivak, and I had him, and he was my biology professor. And we started connecting we started discussing about anthropology, and then something in me said I should go to his office and tell him my story. So I went into his office, I sat down, and I said, Dr. Spivak, I just want to share something with you. And that was the very first time I've ever openly spoke to a stranger or to anyone about my story. And he was so open and receptive and understood my background. And from that point on, he just sort of gave me the courage and the strength to share to more people. And ever since that moment, I was just galvanized to go out and tell the world my story, tell the world that my mom is a Yanomama from the Amazon jungle.
Wow, it's wonderful to see this transition that you make. I think not only can you be an inspiration for cultures coming together, but also just for every youth growing up, having a secret that they think makes them less than something, and finding compassion for themselves, and turning their lives around on that crux or that core that becomes maybe like their pain, it's their tragic flaw, but if they address it, can become their golden ticket kind of thing. It's usually how life is. And
Yeah.
It's more simple than we think if we're really willing to do our homework.
Yes.
Well, you did your homework and you decided that you were going to make this journey, committed to going back into the jungle and finding your mom. But that was no easy feat. It's not like you could send her an email and say, I'm
Right.
coming next week, and just
Right.
pack a suitcase. Explain for us the complexity of even beginning to bring this idea forward and planning it and trying to, how did you put one step in front of another? Where did you begin?
Yeah, so how do you go from being a broke college kid in the Poconos to the depths of the Amazon jungle? How do you begin planning? Well, it was difficult, and it took about 2 years to sort of finally compile a concrete plan in getting to my mother's village. But it started with just contacting various people that had been involved in Yanomama studies, or with my father and my mother. And I started with my father, of course, but he had been sort of disconnected for since mom left, for almost 20 years. So a lot of his contacts, he doesn't have phone numbers. So we just, he was a bit frustrated. He wished he could help me more. But so I started contacting other people, and it happened. It just ended up being sort of like a
Whisper down the lane.
And let's just say, it finally ended with an anthropologist in Venezuela at a research institute called EVIC. And she happened to email me and introduce herself as Hortensia Caballero. And she said, I'm a Venezuelan anthropologist. I understand you're looking for your mom. She said that I will take you under my wing and I'll do whatever it takes to help you get there. And then that is what, gave me the courage and the hopes of actually finding her. So for the next couple years or so, we've had a lot of questions. Is she alive? Where is she? What, and you can't just Google or call somebody up from the jungle and say, hey, is Yarima alive, my mother? And so it took some time. We weren't exactly sure of her whereabouts. We thought she was in one part of the territory, and then we found out she was in another part of the territory. But then on top of that, we need to figure out transportation, resources. But all said and done, in 2011, after I graduated from college, I knew that this was the moment. I was emotionally ready. I was physically ready. I was spiritually ready to embark on this quest to go to the Amazon jungle to find my mom.
Wow. So I understand that this Venezuelan anthropologist actually made a trip on her own, like to sort of preview where you would need to go and to do some fact-finding herself. So talk to us a little bit about that. I can't pronounce her name as well as you can.
No problem. So Hortensia she studied the Yanomami, and her expertise were in land demarcation processes and the government policies that are involved in that, and the Yanomami involvement in land demarcation.
And did she also know your dad from years before?
Interestingly, she had met my father years ago while she was a student herself. She actually had given my father and my mother and me a ride from one place to another in Caracas. I was just an infant. Yeah. So that's
Wow.
pretty something, to come full circle. But she was a young student back then, and now she's a researcher anthropologist at the institute in Venezuela. So she had known our family story for quite a long time. But she had also studied the Yanomama for years. She didn't really study in the same territory area that my father had studied, but still, she was within the Yanomama territory, and she had contacts. She knew Yanomama that could find out, or try to find out where she was. So she did make a trip down there. And on her trip, she was able to find my mom. And we found out that, one, she was alive, and she sent word saying that she was alive. I was so happy, because you never know in the jungle. And she told her that I was trying to come down. And she got really excited. And she's saying, well, what's taking him so long? Just tell him to get on a boat and come on down. I guess she had forgotten, passports and plane tickets and how difficult it was to get from Pennsylvania to there.
Right. It wasn't her world, like you said. When she thought she was leaving, she thought she was just getting on a boat and going to the next village.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
But for my mom, exactly that. But obviously, it was going to take some time for me to get down there. And when I did finally arrive in Venezuela, she wasn't in that same area that she was at before, when Hortensia had met her. And the Yanomami move around quite often. We had learned that she had returned back to her original village, which made things a little bit more difficult, because what that meant for me is that we had to go further upriver, and we had to get past the Guajaribo Rapids into the more remote and isolated parts of the territory. I mean, it upped the adventure factor, but I was not very well trained to survive in the jungle in 2011. That's for sure. So, growing up, I was afraid of even a ladybug.
Right. You wrote well about that in your book when you sat down with your father and said, I want to go. I want to go find my mother, and he said, David, you're afraid of bugs.
Yes, my family was very concerned, because they knew, only they know to what extent I actually had this deep fear of bugs. And here I am going to the Amazon rainforest, where you have Amazonian spiders and bugs.
Well, talk about facing your fears. You just think you...
Yeah.
That one was probably an easy one. Well, this isn't more important. I can get over that.
Yep, but throughout the journey, I just compartmentalized my fears, and I just wanted to find Mom, and that's all I could think about. Yeah.
So you spend almost 2 years. You work with many support people, and you come up with this long packing list and things of supplies you need, and these visas and these documentations and these contacts you need, and you get on the plane, and you're finally there. Describe a little bit for us actually what the journey was like for you in the jungle. Who went with you, and how long did it take you to make your truck from, the last point of civilization where you got dropped off by a truck or a boat or whatever? Really, what was it like?
So
you flew to Caracas, right?
We flew to Caracas. I met up with Hortensia there. From there, we took a flight to Puerto Ayacucho, which is the capital of the Amazonas state in Venezuela. From Ayacucho, we took a bus ride to Samariapa, which is a port town, and we got on a transporter boat, and we went upriver. There's various military checkpoints and towns along the way, small shanty towns, until we ended up at Mavaca, where there is a Catholic mission base. Of the Salesian sect. And there, the priest and the nun had offered their services. They were going to provide the gasoline and the motor and the resources to help me find my mom. And as I went from one step to the next in my journey, I started realizing how people were so willing to help. They were just so willing to help me get to my mom, and I think everyone started really supporting me and getting on board to really make this happen. So it was me, Hortensia, the priest, the nun, and then we had a Yanomami motorist that we had hired. So we were a team of 5, and we started going upriver. But what I had noticed when I was going upriver, because leaving Newark, New Jersey, I was just any other typical kid. I had never camped a day in my life, and I just grew up in suburbia, and I was a paper boy and played baseball. Now here I am, I'm in the depths of the Amazon jungle, and as inexperienced as anyone could be. But what I started realizing was that I was just sort of getting sort of these flashbacks, these memories, and I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't completely foreign to me. Like, I remember this. I remember the sultry air, the temperature of the water, the leaves, the flock of birds, and parakeets flying by, and the monkeys in the trees, and I remember the army ants across the trail, and I feel like, wait a minute, this isn't. I'm not going to this this mysterious land. This is familiar to me, and I started realizing I'm going back home. I'm going back to to my mother's village where I'm from, and it was sort of like this genetic memory I had, and I just felt so excited, and it really gave me the confidence and the strength and the courage to keep going. And so as we were going upriver, we got past. We had the motorist, the Yanomami motorist, was very skilled, and he was able to maneuver the boat up the rapids away from the rocks and prevent us from capsizing. Very dangerous. And I heard stories growing up. My father had capsized at these rapids once when he was sick with malaria, and he almost died. And here we are 20-something years later, and I'm in the same spot. It was very monumental for me until finally we get to a riverbank where there's a group of Yanomami that had heard the motor, and they had told me that this is Hasapuateri, where my mother's from.
That must have been very exciting, except she wasn't where you thought she was going to be, right?
Right, exactly. So we approach the riverbank, and there's this commotion, and we tell them, they ask, who are we? And we tell them, well, Yarima's son's here. Is she here? And she said, no, she's, she's part of a different village now, but she's out in the garden nearby. But one of my relatives had said, well, why don't you stay here? I'll go out and get her. And we looked around and we said, okay. And we got off the boat. And then I was immediately mobbed by the Yanomami because they knew who I was. They knew Yarima, of course. Mm-hmm. And they knew that I was her son, and they were so curious, and they had descended upon me with hands all over my body, pulling my nose, touching my ear, their hands in my pockets. And it was, it was like, it was very, talk about culture shock. I didn't know any of their language, and I was just sort of in complete shock, very nervous, laughing nervously, and they're all yelling at me in Yanomami, and I didn't understand a word they were saying. And they said, okay, let's get our stuff, and we walked into the village, and they told me to hang my hammock, so I hung my hammock, and immediately they're all around me and trying to establish kinship networks. They're trying to tell me this is my sister, or this is her classificatory mm-hmm. sister, my niece or nephew, and so on. And as I was laughing nervously, seeing the sea of heads, the same color hair, same skin complexion, and same eyes, and I realized these aren't just an exotic Amazonian indigenous people talking to me. This is my family. This is my bloodline. Right. These are my relatives, and it was just so surreal. Right. And I was so honored.
Cousins, third cousins.
Yeah. So even though I couldn't understand a word they were saying. And that's one thing my father says, like, you don't speak Yanomami. I didn't even speak Spanish at the time, and you don't speak Yanomami. And I said, Dad, I don't care. I'm just going to do whatever it takes to get down there. But there were two phrases that I had remembered from my childhood. One was Yaohi, which is I'm hungry, and the other was Yaposi shiiti, which is my butt really itches. So those are the only phrases I had to work off of, and in that moment, none of those phrases worked. So I was just, you do that nervous nodding of the head and just, accept everything they say.
Yes, and you start the charade games and things like that.
Yeah.
But at some point, you do find someone who can do some translating for you.
Yeah, at the time it was sort of a three-way translation, Yanomami into Spanish, and then from Spanish into English through Hortensia. Mm-hmm. Yeah, now I've cut down to just Yanomami into Spanish. But yeah. So it was very interesting unique encounter I've had. This was my first initial immersion experience among the Yanomama, and it just made me think what it must have been like for my father, you know,
Yes.
decades ago when he first, contacted the Yanomami.
Yes. So you discover that your mother has basically essentially remarried, although it's not quite the same process. It's a little different, it's a little easier in their culture. And she has other children now. So you end up meeting a half brother, correct?
Yeah.
While you get there. And so talk to us a little bit about what it was like when your mom first met you. I mean,
Sure.
you don't go running up and say, "Hey, it's so good to see you," and hug and kiss like we might hear. It's
Right.
a whole different process. So bring us into that journey of what you experienced.
Up until that, I was so engrossed into learning Yanomama culture and reading. I read every book, every article, tried to learn a little bit more Yanomama, but what I think I didn't plan for was, what do I do the moment I meet her? I didn't really think this through. You think about it in the movies, or am I just going to run towards her like Chariots of Fire, or am I, it was completely awkward when I was in my hammock and Mom had walked in. She was carrying a basket full of manioc, and she had taken a basket and placed it on the ground. There was immediate hush throughout the whole village. And I stood up and I knew it was her right away. I recognized her instantly. And so I just started walking slowly towards her, and she started walking slowly towards me, and we were only about a couple feet apart from each other, and I didn't know what to say to her. I didn't speak Yanomama, and it was clear that she didn't speak English. And so I put my hand on her shoulder, and I said, "Mom, it's me, David. I'm your son. I'm here. I'm home." And she just started trembling and crying, and her hands were just shaking. She was just touching me to see if I was real. Maybe she thought I was a ghost. I don't know. And then all of a sudden, I just started getting immediate flashbacks of when I was 5 years old. Being with Mom when we were on the roller coasters, wrestling on the bed, walking through the park, buying coffee and donuts at Dunkin' Donuts. I just started getting this flood of memories, and that's when I started losing it. To think that 20 years of life had gone by and I didn't have a mom, and all those years that even though I've hated her, but secretly I've wanted nothing more than to have my mother. And when I just put my hand on her shoulder and I looked into her eyes, and right then and there I knew that this was going to be the beginning of a bright new future with my mom. And I also knew right then and there that I didn't care why she left. I didn't care, that she had gone and decided to leave this family, and I had suffered for 20 years. That was in the past. That's over now. We're about to begin a new chapter.
Right, and I'm sure she was processing. We can only be subjective in our thoughts, about what she might have been going through too, feeling her own loss of this adult she didn't know. She missed those 20 years as well.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine what it was like for any mother to, you see your child is 5 years old, and then you don't see him until he's 24, 25.
It must have been as equally hard for her, or harder, as it's 3 children, not just one, and a husband. And yes, it's whew.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah, and I had fears that, either one, I would reject the Yanomama culture, or maybe the Yanomama culture would reject me, and I was ready to accept it. I was honestly ready to accept the fact that maybe Mom wouldn't accept me. Who knows? Maybe it was too westernized. Right. But to see her break down and cry, and you felt the love, that she has for me, and I realized that even though I didn't speak Yanomama and she doesn't speak English, that culture barrier could never dissolve a bond, that a mom has for her son, and that's when I knew right then and there that, we're gonna have a great time together. We had 20 years of catching up to do.
Yes. So, how long did you stay on this first trip, and what sort of stuff? What was your life like on a daily basis?
So I stayed in the Amazon for 3 months, but I didn't stay specifically in my village throughout the entire duration of my trip, because I wanted to. One thing I realized is that the Yanomama of today is very different from the Yanomama of my father's time, and I knew that there were a lot of changes that had happened, and there are a lot of influences that are much greater today than they were back then, outside influences. So I've traveled to different villages. I traveled to military posts to Catholic missionaries, Protestant missionaries. My father laughed. He said, "The only person I know that gets along with the Catholics and the Protestants." But I really wanted to sort of get a, broad range of what the Yanomama people as a whole are dealing with today. But I did make 4 return trips to my village throughout in 2011. When because I didn't want to just see her for a couple days and then that's it, and I did bring her back to one of the Catholic missions. We stayed there for a week, and then I stayed another few weeks in her village. So, throughout the course of my stay, I made 4 trips, and there was a lot of, catching up to do, a lot of learning on my end, the language, the culture, the food and how they live. And I've been back then several times since 2011, and today my repertoire of gear and accessories is very different today than it was back then. Back then, I had almost every little tool and gadget that you could possibly bring to the jungle. And you realize when you're deep down in the Amazon jungle, all you need is a bow and arrow and a machete, and you're good, and a hammock. And I've learned that a lot from the Yanomama, and it just astounded me. Like, wow, these people can live and survive and subsist for thousands of years with just the most basic tools. And not only do they survive, but they live harmoniously. They live, they're so happy. They're just so strong. They thrive. And the way they interact with each other. I've never experienced something so genuine, not on just an individual level, but on a communal level. And, you imagine, because they wake up, they live in a community with 100 to 200 of their relatives, all related. Imagine living in the same room of 200 of your extended family members for 20-something years. I don't think it would last very long in this world.
Most of us couldn't imagine it.
Yeah.
But it is harmonious.
It is.
And they do have ways of dealing with conflict. And
Yeah. I mean, they're human population, human group that evolved almost just like any other human group. They have conflict. There's violence. There's war. There's harmony. There's peace. There's love. And
jealousy issues.
Jealousy, yeah. And I think my dad, had that realization when he studied down there, and I quote him when he say, when you get to know a people well, their similarities far outweigh their differences. And I don't have the experience of living among the Yanomami like my father do, but I do understand that. And you start realizing you don't look at them as other, as them, as separate, especially when it's your mom and it's your your family. So very quickly I learned, I was very, very quickly adopted into their culture. They accepted me like I was just one of them.
And you learned to go out and hunt with your
with
your half brother. And your half brother's name is what?
Tell
us about his adopted name.
Yeah. Soon after I met Mom, I was introduced to this young boy, and they told me his name was Makashi, and I said, "Hey, Makashi," and back then I didn't know what to do, so I just stuck my hand out for a handshake, and I'm thinking, "You idiot! That's not how Yanomami don't do handshakes." But he goes, "No. Ricky Martin. And I was just dumbfounded. I'm like, Ricky Martin? Like, here I am talking about being so remote and isolated in the depths of the Amazon jungle in the upper Orinoco, and this guy is telling me he's Ricky Martin. So I was just absolutely dumbfounded. But I think, I had learned that he left the territory for a while, and he had interaction with doctors and other outsiders, and they introduced Ricky Martin music to him. But the Yanomama love adopting outside names, or Criollo names. So my brother's Ricky Martin.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So he took you hunting and fishing and.
He's a very amazing guy, because the Yanomama don't teach, they don't instruct, they don't say, "Come, son, I'm going to teach you how to fish or teach you how to shoot a bow and arrow." They don't go stepwise fashion. The kids, from when they're very young, look at their parents and they imitate them, and then they go through their own trial and error. But there's never sort of this, instructional aspect of growing up. And that was very difficult for me, because that's all I know in terms of being educated. I was from preschool to college. I've always sat at a desk and had a paper and a pen and listened to an instructor, Well, it's not like that in Yanomama culture, and it became difficult for me to try to learn things from my uncle or from my mom, even my mom. But my brother, he was very special. He somehow understood that, and he was the only Yanomama that I knew that was able to say, okay, you're going to do this, and I'm going to show you. And then he would watch me, and he would correct me, and he would, tell me, you got to do it this way or that way. And he was the only Yanomama that would say, okay, today I'm going to teach you, or I'm going to show you how to cut a tree, or how to shoot a bow, or we're going to go archery practice. And it was very, very, special for me. One, because, for me, it was an accelerated way of learning Yanomama culture. But two, I really bonded with him. I really bonded with my brother, and I think he really, looked up to me and made me realize that what a unique relationship we had. Here I am, Yanomama growing up in the Western world, trying to learn his culture, and he's a Yanomama growing up in that world, trying to learn my culture, and he loved learning how to read and write. Every day, he would ask me, how do you say this in Spanish, or how do you say this in English? He wanted to learn all the numbers in the clock, and how to how to count up to 100 and so on. So
wow. So does he speak some Spanish or some English?
Just very, very little, very just basic words here and there, if that. But you can tell he has that drive to want to learn, and I had that drive to learn Yanomama. So we had a very special relationship, and so he's been monumental in teaching me the way of the Yanomami.
Wow, wow. It sounds like that relationship will continue to be a really critical and special one. You may be the Yanomami brothers in the future that, write books and do films together.
Yeah, as long as I can call him Ricky Martin.
Right,
So.
right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the Good Project and what led you to found a foundation and the mission of the foundation.
During my travels, a Catholic nun had come up to me, and she was dying of cancer, and she has passed since then. But she had told me that, she said, David, you did something in one day that takes outsiders years to do, and as you gain the trust of the Yanomama, they listen to you when you talk. And that hit me profoundly, to think that I could have that kind of impact, with my family and the Yanomami people. Especially during today's times, where the Yanomama world is very complicated, and they're dealing with struggles and issues that sometimes are hard for them to fathom, like jobs and taxes and rights and land demarcation and policies and so on.
Yes, you were talking about gold mining that's coming in, and I know oil mining was going on for many, many years. So these things really can encroach upon the Yanomami without them even knowing, right?
Right.
We were discussing this at lunch.
Yeah. These mines, these illegal gold miners that penetrate the territory, they're supposed to be protected, but either the government can't protect them or they turn a blind eye, and then the Yanomami need a voice, but they need to be able to articulate themselves, to be able to know what are human rights and what are land rights, so that they can protect them and fight for them.
And that's something they don't even conceive of that they need to do.
Yeah, 100 years ago, we're talking about a culture that never counted beyond two, and they just lived by, hunting and gardening. And rights, human rights, what's that? What
why do I need the right?
Why do I need to know what human rights? Yeah,
right.
Why do I need the right to exist? And to put in perspective, the Yanomami were this egalitarian society. There is no class. There's no lower class, middle class, upper class. They didn't even have a leader. They had a headman, but he was only a headman because the people let him be, because they respected him. So they lived in this society where there's no class, there's no form of currency or money or anything like that, no form of accumulation of possessions or materials, no ambition to move up the social ladder, But then you introduce them into the dominant culture and the dominant society, and where do they belong in that society? And generally, and this has happened to other indigenous groups throughout the world, they're in the bottom of the totem pole. They're the peasant class. They're the beggars. They become the beggars. they become looked down upon by the elites and the higher ups, and they are very often they can get taken advantage of. So if they're going to be part, and they are part, of this world, this very complicated intercultural world, they need to understand how it works. They need to know what human rights are. They need to know what land rights are, and so on. They need to know how to read and write.
And so they need to have someone that can represent them.
Exactly.
And
so
you awoke to the fact that you could play that role.
I wanted to play that role because I understand now that I strongly believe there's a purpose as to why I was raised in this Western world. I don't think too many Yanomama understand how this Western world works. I know they're a part of it, but do they truly understand it? I don't think so. And a lot of the Yanomama come up to me and say, you know how the Western world works. They call it the world of the Naba. Naba means outsider. Like, you know how they think, you know how they speak, and you should get them to help us. But, help is a very delicate word. What is help? I don't want to just bring in boxes and boxes of clothes and medicines if and just simply hand out material possessions. That's not really help. In fact, that can be the opposite of help. It could cause dependency. So I really thought hard and long about it, and I thought about it, and I feel like the type of service I can provide is one that has a foot in the Western world and a foot in the Yanomama world, is to build this sort of trustworthy bridge that links the two worlds, that creates dialogue and shares education and resources, so that the Yanomama can have sort of a foundation that can be built upon in the future years, so they have an ability to understand what rights are and education, and to be able to someday have a Yanomama doctor, to have a Yanomama nurse, to have a Yanomama politician that directly affects their life and their policies. So we're very small, we're in our infancy. We may not even see the fruits of our work till long after I'm gone, but I feel like this is worthy of a cause to dedicate my resources to.
It's a tremendously important cause, especially as the civilized world faces its own extinction. We are teeter-tottering right there. We're at the point where we're looking at peak oil and things like this. We need to reinvent new ways of living and new ways of looking at the other around the world and between cultures. So it's so hugely important.
Yeah, I agree. And the flip side of that is that I've come to learn a little bit about the way of the Yanomama and my culture, and I will continue to learn in these upcoming years. And I feel that when I share my story, when I share the lifestyle, whether I'm in a library or at a restaurant or at a bar, people tend to listen. They're saying, whoa, people live like the Yanomama, and people are drawn to that, to know that people can live in a society, in an environment that's free from the perversions of this, of the industrialized world. No pollution. Yanomama don't have pollution. They don't have anxiety. They don't experience loneliness, depression. They don't even have a word for suicide, as far as I know. So these things that afflict us so deeply here in this world, but they don't. The Yanomama don't have those type of afflictions, and people, I find, are drawn to that. So I feel not only can I help the Yanomama, I feel like the Yanomama can help us more than we could ever help them by teaching us how to live, how to be human, how to live so close to the environment, how to have genuine human interaction with not just your friends, but your family and the people around you. And when you live in a day in the life of a Yanomama, you come to appreciate the genuine human interaction and the what's available in this world. The happiness of that you can find in this world isn't in cell phones or laptops or cars or whatever. The Yanomama, I've never had an unhappy day with the Yanomama, and they're just eating their plantains, swaying in their hammock and shooting their bows and arrows. Very limited technology.
Yeah, it's very special when you present. You do a good job at capturing that. I remember the laughter from the audience around what happens when a man and a woman decide they are interested in each other. It's there's no formal marriage. It's
Yeah.
more like you move your hammock next to the other person's hammock.
Yeah, there's no wedding ceremony. Yeah, well, if you want to, you're considered married, you take your hammock and you hang it next to your wife or your husband, boom, married. No legal contract, and no prenups or anything like that. But on the flip side, if you want to divorce, you just take your hammock down, you walk
and
away.
leave and
Yeah.
leave. It's
Yeah.
pretty easy.
So pretty
and
easy.
there's sort of a community approach to also raising children.
Yeah, yeah. There is no such thing as a single mom raising a child in Yanomami culture. All the women pitch in. That is something that I find very beautiful, and living in a communal lifestyle like the Yanomami. Everyone helps each other out.
So there's also some very special things that the Yanomami can bring out to the outside world. You were speaking to me about some upcoming research that you've just begun on. You've just sort of started with NYU University, and it deals with the microbial makeup of the digestive tract of the Yanomami. There's very little disease as we have in the Western world that they don't have, like diabetes and arthritis and heart disease and things like this. So there's now a study to understand what the indigenous cultures' gastrointestinal tracts are like in terms of the microbes that are there.
Yeah, so I'm a biologist in training, and as I continue on in my academic career, I look forward to advancing my biology training. But yeah, so there's a recent study around 2014 where they've gone to a remote, supposedly uncontacted Yanomami village, a group of scientists, and they measured their microbiome of their gastrointestinal tract, and they had discovered that they have the most diverse microbiome ever recorded in human history. And of course, what that means is that they don't, they have a sort of, intestinal system that has been kept in balance, and it's similar to how humans have evolved over thousands of years. But of course, here, in Western worlds, we've lost a lot of that diversity through the overuse of antibiotics and extreme sanitation practices, and not only that, it's our lifestyle and interaction. Everything's in a room. We live in a room, we eat in a room, we shower in a room. Everything's enclosed. Our interaction with the environment is so limited compared to the Yanomami.
Our processed foods have limited the variety of foods that we eat.
Exactly.
So what we get exposed to in our gut is, we're eating antibiotics and drugs and things like that in our food because our animals are doing that.
So studying the Yanomami can I believe they can offer us more than just sort of a psychological or emotional, healing or perspective, but even in their physical makeup, I feel like there is a lot to learn from in groups like the Yanomami. And so I just signed on at the Department of Translational Medicine at NYU to study the microbiome of the Yanomami at various levels of transculturation. You have the isolated and limited contact, high contact, and so on. So those are the two main projects that I'm working on. One is the educational aspect of it, of creating an environment, classroom that's culturally sensitive to their needs, but at the same time help advancing this research so that we can create a sort of a worldwide appreciation for the Yanomami. By understanding that the way they live, there's advantages to that, and we need to learn that, and we need to preserve it.
So if someone would like to support your project, where do they go, and how do they support the Good Project?
Sure. So you can go to our website at www.jointhegoodproject.com. And on my website, you can read about articles about the Yanomami. You can read about the projects that we're working on. You can feel free to check out my photos. I have photos and videos of my expeditions among the Yanomami, very nice photos. And,
or they can invite you to come and speak as
or
well.
yes, yeah, you can, I do speak worldwide to share my story about the Yanomami. And you can learn about the projects that we're doing, and you can donate right there on the website. We are a 501c nonprofit.
Well, I so look forward to being able to share your presentation tonight with our group here at Line Mufon. And I'm so honored to have you come here to Radnor Studio 21 and present. I wish you the best of luck going forward. I wish I had millions of dollars to be able to contribute towards this further research, but I know it's going to happen for you in a big way. And your heart's in the right place, David. It's all going to happen really beautifully.
Thank you so
thank
much.
you
Thank
so
you. It's
much
been
for
an
being
honor.
here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's a mutual honor. Thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you again at Radnor Studio 21 in Line Mufon.